Hi everyone, welcome to the Spark AR Creator Leadership Series. We have a super Spark creator with us today. He's literally the boy next door. By boy next door I mean he's originally a Pakistani native. Now lives and works in London. He runs his own creative outfit. He runs a super specialized creative AR agency, if I may call it as. He's currently also pursuing uh, uh, he's currently pursuing digital direction from Royal College of Art in London. He's been creating AR for almost 5 years, 4 years. He's been working with brands, blue chip marquee, brands like Samsung, Hugo Boss, Avon Cosmetics, Sony, Thomas Cook, and so on and so forth. And to top all of it, he has accumulated over 3 billion impressions on the effects that he's been able to build, create, and produce for various brands that he works for. I request you to join me and welcome Shahwali Shayan, who joins us from his beautiful office in London. Thank you, Shahwali, for giving us your time, and we are extremely grateful to have you with us. It's a series that we're trying to build for Indian developers to learn from leaders like you and take AR and creativity and technology much more seriously, and our effort is to inspire them by giving them access to leaders like you, making them hear your stories, and inspire them to be next Shavalis and next other super creators that we are producing right from India to all over the world. I welcome you all. The stage is all yours, Shaval.
Thank you so much. That was such a fantastic introduction. I don't know if I'll be able to live up to it, but thank you for your kind words. Hello, everybody. I don't know how many people are on the call. I can't really see it, but whoever's here, hope you're well and hope you're doing good. I'm just going to jump into my presentation and sort of take you through my journey and how things happened and how I got into AR, why I got into AR, and where I am today. So, L- on that note, let's begin. So, my name is Shahwali Shayan. As it's been already mentioned, I am a creative technologist, a multidisciplinary designer, and I currently focus on augmented reality and more recently, extended reality and the metaverse. I've always been very interested in design and art, but I'll take you through my journey as to how all of this happened. So, what is my background? As I mentioned, I am originally from Pakistan, but now I live in London. My journey through AR has brought me here, and it's been quite an interesting journey so far. And I'm quite excited to see what happens and how things unfold in the future. So, that's a really old picture of me when I had a fantastic mustache and I was doing my bachelor's in business studies. It's a picture of a young me and I was pursuing business because, well, I wanted to do arts, I wanted to do design, but I couldn't. And the reason I couldn't do that was because of family issues. And I don't know if you're South Asian, I think a lot of you might relate to how when we come to a certain age, we're given a few options. And I picked business instead of art and design. Then I moved to Coventry in the UK. I transferred my degree and my credits. Um, and yeah, I moved to the UK and I started pursuing my degree in international business. I was here for a while. Um, and the reason why I couldn't do arts and design, as I mentioned before, is because, well, I had a Desi family and they always knew what they wanted for me. And I don't want to like demonize families or our structures in any way, but it's I think it's something that happens a lot in South Asia is when you come of a certain age, you're just given a few options, and art and design isn't really thought of, or like the creative professions aren't really always given that same level of weightage when it comes to a career. And parents are always afraid of, like, oh, you know, if you go into this field, you're going to become a starving artist, you won't be able to pay for yourself, what jobs are you going to get, all these sort of things. So I always knew that I wanted to build a career with some sort of creative aspect to it. And after graduating, I was back in Pakistan for 2 years. And then after my graduation, I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, what to do, like what sort of jobs to get, what sort of career to build. And I came back to Coventry because I wanted to build a startup. Because I wanted to build a startup, I was in Coventry and I got sponsored by them. And that was my university, Coventry University. And I was working on building a startup. And unfortunately, after spending 2 years on it, it failed. So, an important lesson there, you might not always succeed. But that was such a learning lesson for me because I got to learn so much from that experience of what I did wrong when the timing wasn't right, the sort of product I was pursuing. I wasn't passionate about what I was trying to build. And I think that is such an important thing is you need to be passionate about whatever you're doing in life. And it makes the ride so much smoother. You sail through things because you actually enjoy what you're doing. So as I said, I spent 2 years on building this startup and I failed. And the next question was, what do I do next? So how did I get into augmented reality? That was a question that I get asked a lot. It's because you don't get taught augmented reality at university, especially because I came from a business background. Nobody understood why or how I figured out, design or why I went into augmented reality specifically. So I saw Instagram effects back in, I think, early 2019. And this was the first time that this whole creator marketplace was booming, and you could see that people are, creating effects. And I saw one, and I was super interested. It was called Beauty 3000, and it was by a creator on Instagram called Joanna Jauska. And I looked at it, and I saw how when she created the Instagram filter, it just went viral. Everybody was using it. There were news articles about it. And naturally, anyone who's into the creative field wants that sort of, exposure, and they want the followers, they want the following and they want the sort of validation from, like, other peers in the industry to be like, people like your work and they're using it and they're looking at it. So I saw that, and it was super trendy, and there was a very select few creators who were making filters at the time, and not everybody had access to Spark AR back then. It was still in a closed beta program. So they had handpicked a few creators, and these were the people who were building effects or filters on Instagram at the point. This was the filter that I first saw, which inspired me. It's called Beauty 3000. Um, and as you can see, it applied this sort of plasticky look on the face with these light reflections. And I thought that was so fascinating. I couldn't believe that you could do something like that in real time through a real time sort of video feed and apply this onto it. And that really got me interested in augmented reality. That was my introduction to augmented reality. Because I was so interested, I applied for the closed beta program, not knowing if I'd ever get selected, because I didn't know what the background of these creators was. And I thought that, Instagram or Meta or Facebook at that point had this group of people who they had selected, and, it worked. So I blindly just applied for it, and I got selected. It started off as a hobby. I created my very first filter inspired by that, which is this. It was called Rangila. So if anybody understands Hindi or Urdu, it means colorful. The term means colorful. Um, and because my face was this colorful, I decided to call it Rangila. And I was like, all these creators are there, and it's important to represent South Asian people. So I'm going to create a filter, and I'm going to call it something that is South Asian, something that we'd understand. So I created this filter, and immediately I started seeing the reception of my work. People were messaging me, my friends were messaging me. Sorry. I loved how real time it was. People were using the filters, and immediately I saw how they were reacting. On the back end, you can always see, when people are sharing videos of your filters. And the thing about augmented reality that I loved so much was that it's so immersive. Anybody who uses the filter will feel something, and they usually express that in a short 5 to 10 second story that they post on Instagram. It's so deeply engaging. It's so interactive. And this filter that I published, I think within a few days got a few 100,000 impressions. And that's when the spark happened in my brain. And I was like, you know what? I have hit 100,000 impressions organically. It is impossible to reach this number of people through any other sort of, traditional forms of media unless you're spending thousands of dollars or pounds. If you're thinking about it from an advertising or marketing perspective, it is impossible to reach this many people unless you already have a massive following. But if you don't, and if you're trying to engage with an audience, if you're trying to build a following, this could have been a tool that people weren't thinking about at the time. So that's when I thought that if I can do this for me, I can do this for brands. If I can get reach this many people for myself for a filter that was published on an account which had like 400 followers, and I had like hundreds and thousands of impressions, this means that I can do this for other brands and for other Instagram accounts. And that's when, the juices started flowing, and I started thinking that I'm going to turn this into a business. And my main focus was going to be on creating audience engagement and to build loyalty, sort of loyal communities around those engagements. So the idea was not for brands to treat customers as just these statistics or numbers, but to sort of build communities around them. Because at the end of the day, the people who are going to use your filters are the people who are the most engaged with your brand. So the idea was that if these people are taking time out of their lives to open the filter, to use the filter, they have some sort of loyalty, and we need to sort of use that to build a community. So I started my freelance practice, and I started publishing on freelance websites and reaching out to people. And after 3 weeks, literally within 3 weeks, I got my first client, and I made my first $1,000. And the interesting thing was that at that point, I didn't even know how to price filters. I didn't know how to build a career out of them. I didn't even know if augmented reality or this hobby that I had at the point would turn into could turn into a potential career. Um, so I made 8 filters for this person who was the father of an influencer in America. And he wanted to get filters for his daughter, who was this booming influencer. And I made 8 filters for him, and I charged $1,000, which looking back was pittance. This was in today's market, that is so underpriced. But at that point, I was, as a young creator out there trying to build a career, trying to build a freelance practice, it is understandable. Like, you get offered a bit of money and you're, blinded by that in a way. And it becomes this sort of validation that, I'm working towards something and I'm getting paid for it. I'm getting paid for making these filters. So I didn't know how to price them, and I thought I'd made it. I got my $1,000, and I was like, oh my god, like this is the most amount of money I've made from a freelance thing. And then I built my business and my practice from there on. I started reaching out to more people. I started reaching out to artists. I started reaching out to people on Instagram. People were reaching out to me. In the next few months, I built a bunch of filters. I literally was DMing these famous artists. There's Callan Shaw in that middle image over there with the rainbow filter. And he's a big artist from Canada with millions of followers. And on the right hand side is Trevor Andrew, who's another artist. And he is the founder of the Gucci Ghost movement. So he is a creator who basically created this thing about Gucci, and Gucci picked him up and collaborated with him, and it was this print that he made, and it was called the Gucci Ghost campaign. So I reached out to them on Instagram, literally one DM, not expecting anything in return, and both of them came back and they were like, yeah, we'd be interested. So we collaborated obviously at that point I was trying to build my portfolio, so I didn't charge for these filters. I was trying to get exposure, and I collaborated with them, and we built these two filters, and they again got like hundreds and thousands, millions of impressions at that point. The one on the left hand side, the would you rather filter that you see, is one of my biggest filters. So that was one of the earliest filters that I made, and it was a simple concept, but it blew up. It went viral. This was my first viral filter. I hope this video plays. So it was this simple concept basically about having this unexpected outcome from, you don't know what question you're going to get, what scenario you're going to get. It played on this simple concept of human psychology of not knowing the outcome and expecting, and that anticipation. And even though this is a very simple filter, it's a random generator essentially. It posed the question of, would you rather? And then it give you two scenarios. So then every creator or any person who used the filter would look at that filter and then have to answer. But because some of the time, some of the questions were quite unexpected, people had really interesting responses, and I loved watching how people responded to the filter. So these are some screenshots of this. Shane Dawson used it. A big influencer from India, Komal Pandey, she used it. A lot of celebrities use it as well, and that's how the filter went viral, because it got these. I never reached out to these people. They organically found my filter, and it just the sort of, the chain continued, and it went viral, and it went from hundreds of thousands to millions, and then from millions to billions, impressions. And every day I'd refresh, and it'd be up, going up higher and higher, and more number of people would be using the filter. And again, like looking back at it, it was such a simple concept. It wasn't something super complicated, but the idea were behind it of human interaction, of engaging with people, of creating that sort of immersive experience was there. And that is how this filter became successful. Another filter that I made was called halal or haram. Again, I'm going to let this play. So it's a simple filter again, and it just asks these two questions about, whether there were only two possible outcomes. It could either be halal or it could either be haram. There was no question. It was just like, are you halal or haram? And I left it to people to interpret it. But again, it played on that same concept of the anticipation of not knowing what's going to come. And people were excited. And the time frame from when it starts scanning your face to when it ends, you know, kept people hooked onto it. So that filter went viral again. These are again a few screenshots of some big creators. It went viral in different parts of the world, and also that was something that was quite interesting to me. Is this idea of what I, because on the back end you can see what countries, the demographics of people who are using the filters, and it was quite fascinating to me that within Kazakhstan and Indonesia, this filter just went viral. Everybody was using it. People were sending me stories. People were sending me comments. They were frustrated when they got a haram. Like, it was random. I wasn't controlling anything. The filter doesn't pick on anything, it's just randomly generated. And people were messaging me. And that is what made it successful. Again, this idea of reward or punishment, or this idea of the unexpected outcome, or just playing on this human psychology. So, how did I start shenanigans? This was my starting point, and I thought to myself, I'd created quite a few filters at this point, and the next question was, do I start a freelancing sort of business, or do I build my company? What do I do? So I partnered up with a few agencies, and I started working as a freelancer. But as I'm sure a lot of you might know at this point, with freelancing, there isn't stable income. You have to, the more you hustle, the more rewards you're going to get out of it. And at that point, I was, trying to build my business. I was trying to build my portfolio. I was reaching out to people. And thankfully, I found a few agencies. And I decided that instead of reaching out to people or influencers, or if I'm reaching out to brands directly, why don't I reach out to agencies that already have existing relationships with these brands? And if I do it that way, then I can have an ongoing relationship with these agencies, and I can, have more than one filter campaigns, and it can go on and on. So I started doing that, and I branded my freelancing practice from being Shahwali, the AR creator, to then being Shenanigans, a small studio, a small AR creative studio. That's how I branded it. And I reached out to agencies. And that personal branding became the most important thing in my career, because it allowed me to step away from the entity of myself and to create another entity, a company, and to brand it as a business rather than a freelance practice. And what that meant was I could get bigger clients. So here's another effect that I made. This was my first big client. It was Sony Music in Chile. So this was for Sony Music in Chile, and it was for the comeback of one of their alternative rock bands called Kodai, and they wanted a filter where whenever somebody is using the filter, they could essentially look like one of the band members from back in the 90s, and they all had these very specific looks that I've shown you in that video there. um, I'll just quickly show these again. So this was a guy called Thomas, who's in one of the bands, um, and this is Nicole, another one of the band members. There's Pablo, and then there's Barbara. So these are the four people who are in the band, and we had to create their looks. So we had to create it through 3D and makeup. And at that point, obviously, like I was still learning, so you can see the progression of things. But this filter again went viral. They got so much traction from it. And that's another point when I realized that, if I build my brand and step away as a freelancer and make this company and really push that idea, then I can charge more. This was my first big budget client, but I got this through an agency. And I started thinking, if I'm getting it through an agency and if I make my own agency, then I could go and, reach out to these clients myself, go out and reach out to these people myself. So that's when Shenanigans was born. And what Shenanigans allowed me to do was charge more for my work, charge those sort of agency rates rather than a freelancer rate. And I was still a one man band at that point, but I had stepped away from Shahwali, the creator, to Shenanigans, making filters for your brand. So, what is Shenanigans essentially? A lot of people ask me, like, why Shenanigans? What's the name? So, Shenanigans essentially is an amalgamation of two words, Shah, which is a part of my name, Shahwali, and Shenanigans, which basically means, fooling around, doing stupid things. And initially, when I started doing augmented reality, I was like, oh, this is just for fun. I'm never going to be able to make money off of it. So, what more, this was such an appropriate name for me. I was like, yeah, let's call it Shenanigans. So, I built a new website. I changed all my Instagram handles, my LinkedIn, my Twitter, everything. I really started honing and shaping the brand. Within the next sort of few weeks, I really worked on my website. I didn't have large budget, so I was doing everything myself. I was building my website myself. I was building my social channels myself. I was branding. I was designing. As a young sort of freelancer creator, you have to do all of these things to really set yourself apart from the crowd, essentially. So I started pitching and nothing was happening because, people were like, oh, we already work with agencies, but they were interested. I struggled a lot with educating them because at that point, people did not even know that augmented reality or Instagram filters, for that matter, could be used as a marketing tool. For them, this was just gimmicks. But then when I showed them the impressions or the data that I had to back my sort of pitch, that's when I realized that they're interested, and slowly the wheels started turning, and a few weeks later, more and more people started responding to me, and I got to charge more, which is the best thing. I really did get to charge a lot more than I had, and every time I would like up my sort of ask by a little bit every single time. And I'd be scared, every single time, being like, oh, what if they think it's too much? What if they think this is ridiculous? And I'd be surprised, because what shenanigans allowed me to do was to really sort of, widen my practice and my business. And then the pandemic hit. But what was amazing was that because the pandemic hit, everybody was online, everybody was on social media. Brands couldn't do activations physically anymore, so they needed to do stuff digitally. And what better way to do it than through augmented reality and filters? So that's when the business started booming. And touch wood, thank God for this. I'm so grateful for this, that back at those times everybody was going through such a tough time, and businesses were not doing well, things weren't working out. But because of this one thing, because my business was fully digital, I didn't need an office space, I was doing everything from home. I was a virtual thing, I was existing in the virtual space. The metaverse didn't exist back then, but if it did, I would have definitely had an office in the metaverse. um, and people were reaching out to me, people were interested. There was more every week, there was an influx of people who were interested in building engagement through social media and through Instagram filters. So while people were going through, our businesses were going through a sort of recession, the pandemic, my business was thriving. And I was very lucky and grateful that my business was thriving. So then how did I build shenanigans from there? What was the next step from there? So, the clients are coming in, the freelance studio, or the creative studio at that point had taken shape. But how do I take what was the next step? How do I take it or make it bigger than just a freelance practice? So I started applying for grants. I looked into incubators or tech incubators, and I said, hmm, let me see what options are out there for me. Are there any other big companies that can support me in my journey or can help me build my business further? And that's when I got incubated by Northern Ireland's biggest tech incubator called Ignite Northern Ireland. And this was the biggest sort of tech incubator in Northern Ireland. I was living in Northern Ireland, which is, for those of you who don't know, the UK has Scotland, England, Northern Ireland, and Wales. So I was still in the UK, but I was in a very specific part of the UK. And I was living in Belfast at the time, which is the capital of Northern Ireland. And through Ignite, I got to be incubated. My business was incubated for 6 months. I got an office space. I was given mentorship for 6 months. I got to meet the craziest people. They got people from like thought leaders. They got people from Silicon Valley. They got people from England, like people who had built millions of dollars worth of businesses, there were unicorns on there. There was such a wide variety of people. And I got funding as well. So that was great because then it meant that I didn't have to worry about getting clients. I could, focus on building the business. I could focus on outsourcing things. I could focus on automating parts of my sales process and marketing and all these small things. And I really, really, really got to learn a lot. It was one of those things where I didn't know what I was getting into when I pitched, and I didn't know if I'd ever get it because I was a person of color, and it was there wasn't a lot of representation for people of color. As a South Asian, there was no representation there in Northern Ireland, but I was the only person of color on that cohort. So as you can see, there's a group of companies there, and then in the second last row at the very end, there's shenanigans. So I was very lucky. I really did luck out. I was there for 6 months, and I at this point, by the time this program finished, I had lived in Belfast for nearly 2 years. I met, like I said, crazy people. This was the last picture I took when I left Belfast, and this was the end of Ignite, and it was our big celebration. And I looked out through the window, and there was this beautiful sunset of Belfast, and you can see Belfast there. And I really thought, like, it is quite metaphorical, quite poetic that the sun setting, and it seemed like an end of a journey, and that is what it was. This is the last picture I took when Ignite ended. And through that program, I realized that they wanted me to be the next billion-dollar startup. And I wanted different things. I didn't want the next, billion-dollar startup. That's not what that wasn't the vision I had. I was always a creator. I was always an artist. That's what I enjoyed doing. I loved building these experiences. I had a different trajectory in mind. Yes, I was building a studio, and yes, I was building a business, but I didn't want it to be, you know, this big sort of tech startup thing. Maybe at another point in my life, I'd go back and maybe that's the direction it takes in the future. But at that point, it gave me the clarity. That experience gave me that clarity that, Shavali, you know what, it's okay to not want the next billion-dollar startup. So then what did I want? I realized that I am an artist at heart. I love technology and I wanted to push the boundaries of it. I wanted to push what everything that I was always really interested in everything that exists at intersections. So everything that was at the intersection of AR, art, technology, design, that sort of common area where everything meets is what I was interested in. So I thought to myself, okay, how do I build my practice? Where do I go from this? So I saved up the money that I got from the grant and everything else. And after 2 years in Northern Ireland, I was like, okay, it's time to move. And I realized at this point that there was a pattern. I stay in a place only for 2 years and then I moved. So when I studied in Coventry or when I was building my startup, which failed, I was there for 2 years. Then I moved to Northern Ireland and Belfast and I was there for 2 years. So what's next? What was next for me? I always wanted to do a postgraduate, and I think maybe this was some sort of a DC dilemma where people were trying to beat this into my head, or like my parents had these expectations of me that, Shavali, jab bade hoge, or when you grow up, you have to do a postgrad. Like it's very important, and you will not be able to compete with people in the world if you don't have a postgrad. So that was something that was always in the back of my head. But at this point in my life, I had built a career, I was building a career, I had the money. And instead of being given the option of what to study, I could decide what I wanted to do. I could decide that my lifelong long dream of wanting to go to an art and design school could come true at this point. And throughout my life, I had always thought, if I do my MBA, I'm going to do it from Oxford or Cambridge because they're the best universities in the world. But then life happened, and I wasn't interested in doing an MBA anymore. I was interested in art and design and technology. So, what was the next best thing? I went to Google and I wrote, what is the best art and design school in the world? And it was the Royal College of Art in London. So, I took a leap of faith and I applied. I put together my augmented reality portfolio. I looked for courses, and this was the one course at the Royal College of Art that seemed to really summarize and articulate everything that I wanted to learn. Digital Direction was the name of the course. And it basically is, again, at that intersection of everything. It is at the intersection of art, design, technology, but it talks about the future of storytelling. How do we build narratives through these technologies? How do we leverage augmented reality and virtual reality and filmmaking and animation and all these sort of things? So I thought, I'm going to apply for that. And lo and behold, I got in. So that's my my student card. And yes, I look really formal in that picture. But yes, I got into the Royal College of Art, and I was really, really lucky because I applied for a scholarship and I got a scholarship. So my program is digital direction as it's seen on the card there. And like I said, it's about the future of storytelling. How do we leverage these technologies? How do we change things? How do we question things? How do we critically look at these technologies and build experiences that are inclusive? Like this course allowed me to really, really go beyond my sort of bubble of what I thought augmented reality and digital technologies or, immersive technologies, what they are and how we use them. So through the Royal College of Art, I then moved from Belfast after 2 years to London. And now I live in London. So what was the next step for me? Where are we today? You know, what are things looking like today? So today, after, a few, I don't know, this is nearly like, I think 70 or 80 campaigns later. It's been 2.5 years since I started my augmented reality journey. And we are a few, like billions of impressions later. here's I am here in front of all of you. I've essentially shown you my journey. It started off from nothing, and I've literally grown over this time because of augmented reality and because of platforms like Spark AR and Instagram. Had I not had these tools, I wouldn't have had this career. I wouldn't have earned a living. But through these tools, through what was given to us, you know, I was able to create this business. And I really, really wanted to talk about this because I really want all of you to think about what creative professions look like in today's day and age. Even today, when I tell people that I make augmented reality filters for a living, they look at me and they're like, that's ridiculous. This is the most ridiculous thing I've heard. But at the same time, it was also the sort of most contemporary 2022 job that one can have. So I am, quite grateful and very, like, I lucked out in a lot of places, but there was a lot of hard work that went into it. There was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, literally. And while I was working with all these brands, I got work with Samsung, I got to work with Hugo Boss, with Sony Music, Avon Cosmetics, Thomas Cook, Rossmann, a big conglomerate in Germany. Like all these brands, looking back, I could have never imagined that I would have ever had any opportunity to work with these sort of brands. But these doors were opened for me just because of augmented reality and because I was really trying to build a career and really trying to focus on things. But then my focus from other than sort of my commercial work, I was also building my personal practice and my artistic practice because at this point I was working at studying at the Royal College of Art. I still am, I haven't finished. I'm still doing my postgrad. But now my perspective of how I view augmented reality as a tool has really changed. To me now, augmented reality is about the democratization of augmented reality. I am such a firm believer that the future of, when people talk about the metaverse and all these sort of things, and they talk about, oh, we're going to have goggles in the future and we will be just cut off from the world. I completely disagree with that. To me, the future is augmented reality. Why? It's because virtual reality essentially replaces your surroundings. And yes, there are great applications for what virtual reality can do, but for me, augmented reality improves lives. It is an overlay onto your real world. You are still not completely taken outside of the world. You can overlay digital experiences onto the real world through augmented reality. And when we have, AR wearables in the future where you can wear glasses and you can look at the world and it improves the world you live in through augmented reality, that's the future I envision for AR. And as I was saying, so while I was at the Royal College of Art, I really started questioning a lot of things. I really started questioning what sort of stories do I want to tell? What sort of experiences do I want to build? And my filters went from being really simple, sort of gamified filters to being filters that asked or questioned things, something which was more abstract, things that are more experience based, things that, take you out of your world and take you to another world, but all through the power of a smartphone. The idea for me, when I talk about the democratization of augmented reality, I mean, you want to make experiences and augmented reality sort of, filters that include people. You want to think about accessibility. You want to think about cultural differences. You want to think about the stories you're trying to tell. You want to think about what questions you want to ask. You want to think about what are the questions around you that are important. What are matters of urgency? What do you want people to think about? How can you use augmented reality in other ways? So, this is another experience that I'll share with you, and this was called Eraser. Eraser, I'll give you a quick synopsis of what this filter is, and then I play the video. So the synopsis that I had in my mind was a fictional narrative, and the year is 2063. So we are 40 years in the future, and a few tech billionaires have decided to create or fund this startup called Eraser, and it's an app. And what this app does is you can buy it for $10.99, and you download it from your app store and you use it to basically scan yourself for trauma And this app comes with two little metal diskettes that you put on your forehead, and you scan. It scans. It uses EEG to scan your brain waves and tells you if you have trauma. And if you do have trauma, then it will help you erase it. And what happens during the erasure of trauma is that when you're removing your individual trauma, you don't realize that your individual trauma is part of a collective trauma. So when you start erasing your individual trauma, which everybody would say yes, like I want to erase my trauma. You start erasing your collective trauma that shapes the identity. So as South Asians, a big part of our trauma was colonialism, but that's also shaped who we are today. We cannot, we cannot. Our reality today would have been very different had we not gone through that. So it was questioning a lot of these sort of, concepts of what is trauma, what is generational trauma, what is collective trauma. And to take all of these abstract concepts and to put it in one filter, I wanted to create like a mini movie essentially that allowed you to have this out of body experience. I don't know if you'll be able to hear the audio, but I'll play the video. So yes, the idea was that once your trauma is erased, you then get this artificially sort of Joker smile on your face, which you can't remove. And that was like obviously these things wouldn't have happened in real life. So this was sort of like a conceptual filter, and the whole idea was very conceptual and it was very abstract. But again, this was something that I built at the Royal College of Art, and it allowed me to, you know, push the boundaries of what augmented reality could be. Really, really push the boundaries of even Spark AR, because this entire filter that you see was under 4 megabytes. So in order to fit that into Instagram was quite challenging. From a technical standpoint, it was very challenging, and to execute it also was quite challenging. So this, what you see right now in front of you, is um, the sort of Spark AR backend side of things. So you can see the map of how technically complicated this entire experience was. It took me days to build it, obviously, and there was a lot of testing, and there was a lot of sort of checking things to making sure it works, all of those sort of things. When I zoom in, you can really see how each one of those smaller sort of if I go back, so each one of these orange boxes that you see is another sort of patch asset that I created. So each one of them is also super complicated and super technically challenging. But this is what I meant. Like, this is what the Royal College of Art allowed me to do, or my sort of creative practice allowed me to do, was to really think beyond what an Instagram filter can be. Can I use it to tell stories? Can I use it to build narratives? And even the way that I presented it, I presented it in an installation. It was published on Instagram for people who wanted to see it, but I created a mini exhibition, and I created sort of like a trade booth. and I created my brand ambassadors. I created, like, Katy Perry was aged because it's 40 years in the future, and she's talking about, have you found your happiness? Because I have. And it really, this idea, the inspiration behind this was the idea of, like, big sort of American startups, and the founder of and founders who have this sort of capitalistic mindset of wanting to fix things and finding the problem and then fixing the problem. And sometimes you don't really need to fix the problem. Sometimes you just need to let the problems exist, or you need to let them take their course and get out of it. So that was the sort of narrative that I was trying to build. And yeah, so this is all of this was built through Spark AR. And I it really allowed me to question what an Instagram filter was, and really push the boundaries of Spark AR. My computer was about to literally take off because I was pushing it to that boundary of what it can do with the thing, with compression and all these things. So yeah, moving on. Why is augmented reality important? You know, why is all of this? What is this entire sort of session that we've had? Why am I talking about augmented reality so much? Why is it important in the future? I touched up on a few things, but I'm gonna sort of go through these again. We as human beings love communicating, we are social animals essentially. And as we've evolved and we've had new ways of communicating, we now have social media, which are even, allows us to do that. And what augmented reality does is it improves the way we communicate with each other. It improves how we interact with our space, our digital space, our virtual space. Augmented reality bridges the gap by allowing sort of, connection, engagement, interaction, things that we were previously missing, because, attention spans are shrinking every single day. People are going from, scrolling. We scroll endlessly. You see an ad, you scroll past it. Why? Because we don't have the same level of attention that we did before. But the nature of augmented reality content requires you to sort of take the time and engage with it. That's the only thing that makes it work. The user is, or the participant, I don't want to use the term user, the participant is a very important part of the augmented reality experience, because the participant activates the experience. So, from a brand point of view, why this was important, it's because this then allowed brands to create communities, and it allowed them to look at their audience, and it allowed them to get their audience to create content for them. Because with these filters, what people do is they use a filter and they post it on their stories. They're essentially promoting the brand. And not every experience needs to be, just covered with logos or anything. It can still be a branded experience with the way they shape the filter, or the story they're trying to tell, or how they're including their audience into the filter. And that is why augmented reality is important. The ads that use augmented reality don't always look like ads. So if you've seen, especially in a post-pandemic world, you can now get people to try on jewelry, try on makeup, try on clothing, try on watches, shoes. All of this was catalyzed by we went through sort of like this period where people weren't sure, people were skeptical about augmented reality, and then the pandemic happened, and everybody was like, oh my god, we need to focus on digital. What do we do if this happens again? All these sort of questions. And so augmented reality has allowed that, which is why it's so important. The great thing about augmented reality, or specifically the sort of augmented reality that I'm talking about, which is called social AR, because it uses social media, is, things like Spark AR and Instagram and Facebook, is that you're reducing the barrier to entry. You are creating augmented reality experiences where people can just they're already using social media. They don't need to download another app, or they don't need to leave their sort of digital world that they live in and do something else. They're already on it. So you've initially, by posting an AR experience on Instagram, for example, you've reduced that barrier of entry because you're targeting the people who are already on that app. So you don't need additional gadgets, or you don't need other platforms to publish your work or to publish your art or your creation. And unlike, as I mentioned before, unlike virtual reality, augmented reality adds onto your real world. It doesn't subtract from your real world. Virtual reality subtracts your sort of vision and adds a completely different world around you. So that's what I think, or why I think augmented reality is important. And on that note, I hope everybody's still with me. But on that note, I'm gonna end. So yeah, these are my social channels. If you wanna add me or say hello, my Instagram is there, my LinkedIn is there. Feel free to scan the QR codes or look at my handles. I'll stay on this for another 10 seconds and then I will move on for anyone who wants to take a picture. But yeah, just reach out to me. I'm always available on my social channels, always available on LinkedIn, always available on Instagram. I try to respond to everybody within a day or two, so please bear with me. That's my website. It's shenanigans.co.uk. If anybody wants to check more about my work, or you know, if you wanna just say hello again, just drop me an email. Thank you all for watching, and thank you so much for your time and for listening to me.
Thank you. I think it was fantastic, and I really loved the work that you've been able to put together. There are some questions that have come, but since I am hosting you, I should have the privilege to the first question.
Go
Um,
for it.
so there has been a lot of emphasis on training of these developers now, especially with courses coming in and on. And I would want to believe when you started about three and a half year, 4 years back, there was not much of these courses. How did you started? How did you learn? Where did your motivation came from?
That's a very good question. And looking back at it, I really had to rely on the community. So the reason that I'm doing this is because I'm part of a community. I'm a part of a larger augmented reality creator community. And had I not gotten that level of support from other creators who were probably, technically more sound than I was at that point in time, I wouldn't be sitting here today because I didn't know what to do or how to build experiences. And also, there was a lot of trial and error, at that point, because it was still in beta, people were still trying to figure out. But being a part of that community meant that there was a Facebook group, and I'm sure if a lot of you people who are using Spark as a Spark, our community group, and that is the group I joined. When I joined it, there was literally, I think, a few hundred people on it, and now there's like 100,000 people on it, and people are posting questions and they're helping each other. So the community is fantastic. We have this level of support for each other and this openness to help each other out. But other than that, there was a lot of self learning as well. There was a lot of sort of tweaking, a lot of hours spent, a lot of frustration when something wouldn't work out, and I would have to pull my hair out every single night. But eventually, you get there. It's sort of like, um, when you buy a new pair of shoes, and you have to break them in. If you buy a pair of leather shoes, initially it's always going to be uncomfortable, and it'll take a few weeks, it'll take a few months, and you break into the shoes and it becomes comfortable. So that's the analogy I think would work best for augmented reality or any sort of like tech software for that matter. Like initially there is a learning curve, yes, but it isn't impossible. Everybody can learn it. Anyone can at this point. Young people are doing it. There's old people who are much older than I am are fantastic AR creators. So to answer the question, I think the community and a lot of trial and error and YouTube tutorials. YouTube, I think, has been, if I look at my life, I think if I were to contribute, if I look at like all the academic sort of education I've had, and I can single handedly say that YouTube has been my biggest source of education. So use the resources that you have, use the resources that are out there, and just ask people, ask for help. Don't be, that would be my advice to young creators is don't be afraid to reach out to people and ask for help.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Self learning and seeking or engagement with community is something that we also believe is the.
Absolutely. I mean, to add on to what you're doing essentially is this is something that we didn't have before. So there were no courses, there were no organizations at that point who were allowing, or what's the word for it, who were facilitating the growth of young creators, who were creating courses, reaching out, going to universities, teaching them about AR. None of that existed. We were relying on each other at that point. And I'm glad that now, people like yourself have taken this initiative and reskilled for that matter. And you are, inspiring a younger generation of creators. And I'm super excited to see what they build in the future.
Absolutely, and we'll be, happy to kind of showcase some of the work that these young developers are doing via our group pages, etc. There are one or two questions that have come in, and then I'll, in a sense, let you go. There's this question, and which is what you also, I think, spoke about, that Indian, Southeast Asian, from a parent's perspective, you ought to make a career. So this is still, AR creation is perhaps is still very early in becoming a full-fledged career option from a parent's perspective. So there's a question saying, what if I do not succeed? I mean, what are the fallback options from a tech perspective? From a, can I be something else if AR, my journey in the AR creative domain does not work?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, yes, that's a very good question. What is the fallback? Well, the thing about augmented reality or these sort of softwares is that regardless of whatever, you will pick up a skill set, which is going to be problem solving. There is, if you just go beyond what the through from the realm of the software itself, there are other add-on skills that I personally have picked on. It's not just this. Even reaching out to people and failing and getting that no, as when you're reaching out to a brand and they're like, no, we're not interested, or when you're educating them, and you're trying to talk to them about augmented realities, you are learning things. You are learning, communication. You're learning business communication. You're learning how to hustle. You're learning how to, um, you know, even the skill sets. I think from a technical standpoint, if you are an AR creator, the software that you use gives you the technical prowess to then use those same skills in other softwares as well. So through Spark AR and learning visual coding or using those nodes that I showed in that map has allowed me to pick up on other platforms, other things like Unity, Unreal, like all these which aren't like related to augmented reality, but they use a similar sort of building mechanisms. And yes, it is very difficult to convince parents. I think that's the biggest challenge. So if anybody's here and you want um, somebody to convince your parents, give them my number or just organize a Zoom call and I'll convince your parents. But I am living proof of the fact that it works. And yes, it is difficult. It is not easy. Not everybody is gonna have a smooth sailing ride. And now as people are going on, or more and more people are entering the AR space, it is becoming difficult. But it is also important that the conversations we're having now are not the conversations we were having 5 years ago. The idea of the metaverse has opened up this whole new world of what augmented reality is or what it can be. So the opportunities that are coming now are not opportunities that existed 5 years ago. And there is a sort of exponential growth that seems to happen every year. So there is a way to look at it glass half full, which is that yes, there are difficulties, but then there are also all these opportunities and they're only increasing every year. So why not, try it? And if you are a young person and as a young person you have a lot of time to experiment. Like this is the time to experiment with your lives of what you want to do in the future. And if you are really strict or you have another backup plan or you're feeling like, oh, I'm going to give yourself a time frame, give yourself a fixed time frame, say I'm going to do it for a year. And if I get this, if I'm successful in that 1 year, if I get one client or two clients, or if I make something out of myself, then I'll continue. And if not, then you can go on to other things. But what this experience will do is either way you're going to go out of it having learned something. You know, do not be afraid to fail. Failure is one of the most important lessons that life can teach you. And I am a wholehearted advocate for failure, which sounds ridiculous, but I think it is very important, especially when you're young. I think it is something that not only builds your character, but also prepares you for what comes later on in life. And I don't want to scare everybody, but I'm a bit older than a lot of people. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
No, absolutely. I think fear of failure, stops us from many risks, initiatives, or whatever that we want to do in our lives. But the last question, and absolutely you could, which essentially is also about skilling. You spoke about skilling. You spoke about how AR would become mainstream per se. Um, how important would the role be of developers, the technology developers, in building metaverse in the future? I mean, and I'm linking it back to the job creation, I mean, at some stage this would, uh, you know exponentially expand the whole world of AR. So what roles do you foresee, and how important would this become?
Yeah, I think now, even in the last, if I'm in the last 6 months, right, I've seen new job creations and roles that I had never seen before. So companies are now hiring AR creators, not just freelancers, but like full-time jobs. That did not exist 2 years ago, 3 years ago. There are now people who are hiring metaverse consultants who specialize in AR. There are people who are hiring AR, sort of not only Spark AR or like social AR, but like other forms of AR as well. Like augmented reality exists beyond social AR as well. So we need to take into account that, there's researchers who are being, AR researchers. There's AR researcher. There used to be UX researcher, user experience researchers, but now there's jobs for people who are UX researchers specifically focusing on AR. Augmented reality, there's such a heavy investment in the industry at the moment for AR. If you look at Facebook, if you look at Meta now, sorry, not Facebook. If you look at Google, if you look at any brand, if you look at Apple, they're all investing billions of dollars into building AR technologies and wearables and new things. And while we speculate as a general population, it is also important to think about why they're doing this, because there seems to be something in all of this that we might, as the general population, might not always recognize. But as someone who's in the industry, I can tell you that AR developers or creators or people with that technical knowledge are going to be the backbone of whatever's happening in the future, because these are the people who are going to build the world, the virtual, the digital world that we live in the next 5 years. A lot of what we're going to do is going to become, you know, as we're moving towards the sort of decentralization of things, there is a lot that AR or augmented reality developers will have to contribute in the near future. So, guys, do not be afraid. There are plenty of jobs that are already here, and there's more that are coming. So, yeah, the future looks quite exciting.
On that note, thank you so much. Future does look very exciting. It has been, an honor, pleasure interacting with you. We look forward to have more such personal interactions. You spoke with your heart, and I think that is what is required to inspire the next set of Shahwalis of the world. Thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to interact with you more often than this.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It was great to be here and great to speak to everybody and for giving me the platform to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.